We just zoom out and look at and situate this very conversation in the broader problems in the Indian electorate. For instance, we have opacity in electoral funding. We have asymmetry in resources. We often see a blurring of lines between state and party machinery. We are seeing the media, the independence of media being increasingly threatened. We have low media and information literacy in the country. We have divisive politics in the country. And I can go on, but that is the context of the Indian electorate as of now. And so, regardless of AI, we have a situation wherein the circulation and proliferation of misleading content is anyway going to happen. With AI, and we've discussed the various threats, I just wanted to give this disclaimer because we need to situate this conversation in that context. So yes, AI generated content does, can be used to mislead and deceive voters, to influence political narratives, which can in result affect voter beliefs, perceptions, sentiments, even behavior. So that is definitely a possibility. Whether we can conclusively state today that AI in this general elections will, significantly skew electoral outcomes or will have a determining impact in electoral outcomes, that is something that we can't ascertain just yet. So that's that. Quickly, if I come to just a few more fears, I think I'd just like to reiterate what Archie said about someone being able to very easily, with no use or reliance on tech, falsely claim a real video or a real piece of content as misleading or as a deepfake. And I need no tech to do that. I can just falsely claim it. And that we need to think about the consequences that will have for media legitimacy, for press legitimacy, especially in a politically fragile environment as ours. So just wanted to reiterate that point. The next point on personalization, which I think you touched upon in quite depth. We are seeing personalization in campaigns, and I think personalization always existed. But the thing to remember here is that, like you mentioned, right? When we are, so yes, there is one aspect to it which is a negative use case wherein you are discrediting someone else's campaign and opposing politician's candidate with the use of deepfakes, creating manipulated content to discredit someone's content. That's one aspect of it. And the other aspect is when you're making false claims with the help of such technology to bolster your own campaign. And in that scenario, in a personalized situation where a voter is getting a call wherein the voter is being addressed in his or her name or their name, the voice is mimicking that of their political candidate. At such level of personalization, we need to step back and ask, does the voter have the literacy to understand this is synthetic media, this is AI generated? If say there is a disclaimer at the start of the call, because I've known some people, some firms which do give that disclaimer, who do this kind of work, is the voter aware of what do you mean by synthetic media? Do they have that understanding? Will they be able to distinguish between real and synthetic when that disclaimer pops up on a platform? Right? And even if platforms give that disclaimer saying that this is synthetic media, this is manipulated media, this content has been altered, in certain instances, especially when used in campaigns, this can still lead to violence and radicalization. So that threat is very, very real and does exist. A lot of people were asking me about IT rules and regulation. Now, regulation is interesting. Now, the government's positioning with respect to deepfakes have been, if you followed the government's, and particularly the Ministry of Electronics and IT's response to deepfakes is, we need to regulate this. And we all understand where that's coming from. Even our first thought needs to be, okay, this needs to stop, especially because it has harms for fellow panelists were saying, vulnerable minority communities. But a lot of the focus is on platforms, and platforms' responsibilities, platforms' duty. Again, going to zoom out, and as a policy person, the threat there is that a law like IT rules, which is deeply, deeply flawed. As journalists, you may know how that's often been used to clamp down on free speech. Something like IT rules is always held on top platforms as a sword, saying you take immediate and rush interventions, you take actions against these, deep fakes or AI generated content. Again, like you mentioned, right, all of these words, the phrasing in the IT rules has for a very long time been very vague, very open-ended, very arbitrary. So relying on those arbitrary and vague phrases, they are imposing this obligation on platforms to take action. Failure to do so will lead in penalties, will lead in taking away safe harbor, which is like their immunity, taking away immunity of platforms. So in that scenario where platforms essentially have no choice, and they've come out, several platforms come out and even said that we are left with no choice but to protect our employees and to protect this platform, we will have to take action. Even if that means that taking action in the absence of an understanding, both on the platform part of the government and platform, that what does online harms mean. And we've been saying this to the government for the longest time. We need broad, in-depth research on their conceptualization and their understanding of online harms, including but not limited to harms arising out of use of AI-generated content. What do you mean by that? What does that envisage? And the reason I'm stressing on this, that to not have vague and arbitrary provisions, because then that leaves the room open for selective enforcement, and that is scary, right? The misuse of such, and also overly policing online content, which can then lead to proactive censorship, because platforms are scared to present it. So yes, the IT rules does somehow address deepfakes. Rule 3 subpart 2 of the IT rules does say that platforms or intermediaries must promptly remove or disable access to content that includes artificially morphed images depicting individuals in compromising situations. This applies to both sexual and non-sexual deepfakes. We were talking about detection earlier. It's also widely documented that deepfake detection or AI-generated detection also has its limitations, especially when it comes to audio deepfakes. There are several limitations with that. Even watermarking, whether that's visible or invisible on the image or the video, there are very easy tools and accessible tools available online to remove that watermark. So there are limitations in terms of what platforms can do. And at least in the short run, we may not expect a lot of relief from the platforms because of these limitations. And because of the concerns with respect to censorship. So I think last closing statement would be, I think we need to pull back focus and put that focus on political parties. There is no conversation around what accountability or responsibility parties have towards voters. Not just while creating deepfakes or circulating deepfakes that bolster their campaign or discredit someone else's campaign, but in the case of Ranveer Singh's and Amit Khan's deepfake, which benefited a particular party, that party also has a responsibility to come forward and say, this is a deepfake, we do not condone such deepfakes, we publicly commit to not using deepfakes. That is their responsibility towards their voters. And this goes for each and every party. So that conversation is entirely missing. I have wrote an open letter to all political representatives at the union and state level, asking them to publicly commit to not use deepfakes to deceive voters or manipulate voters, because there are positive use cases, of course. And no surprise, none of them responded or signed to the letter. 200 plus individuals did, but political parties did not respond, even though you'll see a lot of parties go in the media and say, oh, this is a big concern, especially the incumbent government saying this is a big concern, we need to stop it. But it's just that if one party is using it, the other party, they will be like, okay, we might as well use it, it will benefit us, because of the resource asymmetry in the electoral landscape.